Hello and welcome to episode 7 of this space exploration Factorio series. Now, in the last episode, we got to Mariel. As I've just found out, it turns out that all of these planet names, and maybe not Novice, but all of them, the other ones, are differently named for every person. So, Mariel, that's what it is to me. It might be something else to you. We built this small little base on this planet to deal with Volcanite and to deal with a couple of other things that go with the Volcanite, like oil, sulfur, sulfuric acid, iron, steel, stone, sand, that kind of thing. And we got the uranium going so that we're processing some stuff. But all in all, what we're actually doing is using a vast amount of water. Just an absolute lake of water is flooding into this thing, and it's just slurping it all up, just drinking it down and then asking for more. And as a result of that conversation, and as a result of that last episode, this conversation is still going on. I'm not sure if you can still hear the Discord messages popping in the background. So everyone's telling me, use ice. And I didn't appreciate ice. Did not consider the significance of it. That's maybe the best way of saying it. Because I just thought that one ice equals one water. I didn't see what was the benefit in using ice. But turns out to be a heck of a lot more powerful than that. Because one ice makes 100 water. And we have a stack size of ice of 200. So each stack size of ice actually stores 200 times 100, 20,000 water. Whereas a stack size of barreled water only has 500. So it makes no sense at all to ship barreled water across the galaxy. And that makes no sense whatsoever. And I've had this fact explained to me, and obviously it is going to change the plan of where I am now, because it makes no sense to put water in a barrel anymore. And now I know that we need cryonite to be able to do that, and I have a plan for that as well, because on my platform, here we go, we obviously had this tiny patch of ice, which again I thought was quite small. My memory of it was that it had about 180,000 in it, which I just assumed was 180,000 water, but it's not, because it's actually 1.8 million water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab up all of the ice, or at least 90% of the ice that I've got on this platform. I'm going to move it over to here, and then I'm going to switch out all of the assembly machines that I currently have for water barrels, for unbarreling that water, and I'm going to swap them for some electric boilers. And then I'm going to don't know what I'm going to do with the excess barrels just yet. That's an open question there. We'll think about that in a moment. But I'm going to just replace everything with ice. Just anything that needs ice. This might cause some complications. I haven't really thought this through yet. I think I'll be okay. It might screw up my geometry a little bit. But I think we'll be okay. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. That's what needs to happen. It makes no sense to use barreled water. We need to set this up for ice. And the plan is that 1.8 million value of ice should last, if we're using, say, 50k of water an hour, say-ish, permanently. And that should last a good 40 hours or so. So, hopefully, in the meantime, whilst we deplete that ice, we will come up with some cryonite, because this is where I've been pushed, is that we need to set up some cryonite production to make ice, and then we're going to use that to ship that across space. Well, that's kind of changed my whole plan, because my plan was to start building the rocket launch stuff, and that was going to involve quite a lot of logistical, and now that I can use ice, the full implications of this haven't become clear to me yet. I'll be honest. I need to ponder a little bit longer. Anyway, for your perspective, we're just going to build, and whatever I decide to build is just going to happen. And then let's just get on with it. Okay, so little bit of an unusual situation here, for me at least anyway, which is that I've built this thing, and I quite like it, and I think it will do the job that I thought I wanted it to do, but having built it, I kind of had this gut reaction to it, which was that something was wrong. And you know what's actually happened is I've built it, and then 3 or 4 days have passed whilst I've been thinking about whether this is the right way to go or not. And what I've decided is that I think it's the wrong way. I think the way that this has been built and constructed, the plan that I had in my head, is wrong. And the only way for me to really get to the bottom of it, to kind of illustrate that to you, is for me to get my sketchbook out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera over to my desk, get my sketchbook out, and I'm going to start drawing my thought process. Hopefully that will illustrate why this needs a little bit more thought. Yeah. Right, so my thinking is kind of as follows. So we have a planet. This is our base planet, Novice. I'm going to call it our base planet just for argument's sake at this moment in time. We also have another planet. This is the planet we're currently on. It's called Mariel in my playthrough, but it could be called anything. So I'm just going to call it Volcanite, just for argument's sake. You know, potentially this planet might be producing other things that you might want to transport around, but for my purposes at this point in time, I'm just trying to keep things simple. So we're just going to deal with it, just Volcanite at the moment. And we've also got another planet somewhere else, which I haven't identified yet, which is going to be producing cryonite or ice, depending on how this works out, because this has the potential for change, a lot of change. Now, my thinking when I built this control panel was rocket parts. Rocket parts at the moment, we only get 20 to 30% of them back from a rocket launch, but potentially in the future, I've obviously looked through the technology tree, that has the potential to be 100%. So we put 100 rocket parts in a rocket and we get 100 rocket parts out at the other end wherever it lands. And that system is very, very similar, at the 100% point, is very similar to barrels. It's almost identical. You know, in my mind, a space rocket at 100% efficiency is now just a giant barrel full of things. And we need to manage those barrels, because at 100% efficiency, at this point in time, with the base the way that it is, we need loads of rocket parts. We're in deficit of them. But when we're at 100%, we're going to be at a point where we've got too many of them and we need to stop producing them, and we need to just be in the business of managing them. And so when I kind of sat down and built this control panel, that was where my mind was. It was on focusing primarily on the management of those rocket parts. So in my mind, I was going to treat this like a radial system in the jargon. So on the base planet, we're going to be producing rocket parts and rocket fuel, and we're going to transport those rocket parts and rocket fuel to Volcanite so we can build a rocket and transport those Volcanite rocks somewhere else. And the way that I've built this control panel with this radial system is for those Volcanite blocks to come directly back. So we're going to bring every single Volcanite block that we produce is either going to stay on this planet or be transferred back to the base. Now, on this planet where we're producing cryonite, depending on how I feel, depending on how the tree works out, you know, if I need ice in a lot of places, I don't really know how it's going to happen. But I'm going to be delivering rocket parts and rocket fuel here in the same way that I'm doing here, because we need to build a rocket. We need to transport whatever it is that this thing is producing somewhere else. So we need to build that rocket. And once again, the way that I've built this control panel is for those, whatever it is that I output from this planet, whether it be ice or cryonite, will go through the base planet. And in much the same way, if we had any other planets, they would all do the same. They would all get rocket parts delivered to them, and then they would re-deliver, you know, in this kind of loop system, this radial loop system. It would kind of go back and forth from the base planet. Everything would go through the base planet. That was what the control panel that I've built. But I've been thinking about it, and I thought about it before I built the control panel, and I thought that this would be the simpler option. But I'll be honest, I've had a comment about Volcanite, and these things stick in your mind. Not necessarily specifically because it's Volcanite, but because of the potential for things to come into play in the future, which makes this system a nightmare. So let's just assume Volcanite needs to go to several places. I mean, that was the comment that I got in the video. But for my purposes, you know, it's not really about the specifics of it. It's about the system, and you know, I might need ice in several places. Do I want to put all of that ice through the base and then radiate that outwards? So it's the same problem. It's just, you know, I'm going to deal with it just for Volcanite for a second. So let's just say that Volcanite needs to go to several places. That's going to result in several rockets coming back to the base, and then potentially several rockets needing to go to other places over here. Logistically, it's going to make this center point very, it's going to be doing a lot of work. Now, when I built it, I was fine with that because my priority was rocket parts. Now, you know, I was trying to kind of figure out a system to deal with those. But having built the panel, and this is not the only time I felt like this. When you know, sometimes in Factorio, I will build something, and the simple act of building it means that I learn more about that process, and it means that looking back at it in hindsight, almost immediately after I built, I realise I've made a mistake and I want to build it again. You know, the simple act of building it I've learned lessons from doing that, and if I was doing it again, I would approach it differently. And the thing is, you know, this is a galaxy-wide system. You know, whatever system I set up now is going to be the system that I use throughout. I know I've set up a little system from base to the Norris orbit, but that's really kind of self-contained. It doesn't really get involved in any of this at this point, in my mind. You know, we might be delivering more stuff. In my mind, we're delivering more stuff to that planet from other places. You know, if this is our novice platform, then we're going to be delivering stuff to it. And that can kind of feed into the rest of the system. And this is mostly going to be science on this platform. So I'm imagining that the volume of materials that we're going to need for that process is not going to be a lot. But I've kind of decided to deal with this as a self-contained thing on its own. And this galaxy-wide system, I think with the radial layout, I don't think it's the right way to go, because I think we're going to need so many rockets. You know, okay, let me just draw out the alternative, the thing where I'm thinking, and let's kind of compare the two, because that's probably illustrative in its own right. So, let me just make sure I've got this book in the right place. There you go. So, we've got our base planet. We've got Volcanite. And we've got Cryonite. And we've obviously also got these other planets out here somewhere, which, you know, will come into play at some point in the future, but they're not here just yet. Now, rocket parts are always going to have to be a radial scenario, because they're all being built on the base. You know, I did kind of consider the idea of constructing a little factory, you know, a perfect little factory that just built rocket parts and rocket fuel. You know, we would have like a little block of factory units, and we'd have some inputs, and then we just input that stuff in, and then on the other side we get out rocket parts and rocket fuel, and we get the rocket, and I can put that little factory on all the planets. But I don't really want to go that way just yet. You know, that kind of feels like there's a lot of processes involved in rocket parts. It would be a complicated little factory. It would be a lot of fun to build, but I don't think it's worthwhile at this point. You know, if I was doing several SpaceX runs, then that might be one run that I try, one thing I try out. But you know, at this point in time, I don't know whether I'm going to get the opportunity to do another SpaceX run, because of obviously the DLC is potentially coming in a few months, and you know, that might warrant a certain amount of time and playthrough when it comes. So I don't really that idea of building a little factory is very, very cool, and I'd like to do it, but I'm not going to do it now. So in terms of rocket parts, I'm going to treat them in the same way that I was treating them before, as in a kind of radial zone. They're all being made on the base, and they're all going to be transported to all of the individual planets in order for us to move those resources around. You know, these are all going to be rocket parts, rocket fuel, and pretty much not much else. You know, for this system, the idea was that the same rocket that's delivering the parts and the fuel would also deliver the ice. You know, now we need ice on Volcanite in order, we need all this water. So the ice would, well, the cryonite, let's just say for example, the cryonite gets produced on this planet, gets put on a rocket, we produce the ice on the base planet, and that ice then goes to several places. That was kind of my idea, you know, and there might be something that we need on this cryo planet that we need to make cryonite, and that might need to come from some other planet, so that might need to come on this rocket as well. We might, you know, these rockets that are delivering the rocket parts, in my mind, weren't just delivering the rocket parts, but they were delivering the materials that we needed to make other things on this planet. You know, we might need, there might be all sorts of things we might need on here, and those things can be delivered in this radial wave from the base planet. And I think that's kind of not what I want to do. I want to do that, the radial part with the rocket parts, but then with let's say Volcanite, I'm going to move that directly to the other planets like so. That's not going to be radial anymore. That's going to go straight to the planets. Now this has consequences, this kind of system, and it is primarily to do with the management of the rocket parts. Because in this situation, in my mind, it doesn't quite work out the way I thought. The way that I've built it is that we've got a single kind of self-contained loop. So rocket parts come here, rocket parts come back again, rocket parts come here, rocket parts come back again. And that can be a self-contained system in its own right. And that's the system that I've built. I haven't really built the potential for further rockets. I think in my mind, if I was going to do further rockets, then I would do further ingredient rockets as well. So I'd have more rocket parts and fuel, and then I'd have more rocket parts, and then more Volcanite. So I would have these infinite kind of loops depending on how many rockets I need. I think that was kind of where my mind was going, but this is all wrong. I think this is all wrong. I think this is the way to go. But the consequences for the management of the rocket parts is consequential. There is a consequence to that. Yeah. So at the moment what I've got is a single landing pad. That goes to a silo. That's what happens. And then, so the landing pad, we get ice from it. And then the silo, we take Volcanite off the planet. And that's the kind of the system that I've built into the control panel to kind of deal with this Volcanite problem. But that's not the system that we have now. What we have now is we've got a single pad. And that could potentially need to deal with several silos. And let's just say, for rocket parts' sake, we've got a little chest that we're measuring the ingredients of so that we can determine whether this base needs more rocket parts or not. Potentially, if this silo is more active than the other ones, say we need a lot of Volcanite to goes to one particular destination, but these other two silos, we need less of them. They're less critical processes. It could potentially mean that this box could get empty, but these two boxes would still have rocket parts in them, and then that would tell the system that we didn't need rocket parts. So I think what I need is a loop. Like, I need a loop of conveyor belts where an inserter picks up off that loop only when these boxes are empty, and then we kind of use this loop of conveyor belts as a store of rocket parts. So the rocket parts that come directly off the ship, they get put onto this belt. We're going to have some packed rocket parts that need to be unpacked, and they're going to need to be added onto this belt. And that's just not, it's not going to be rocket parts. It's not just going to be rocket parts. We're also going to need one for capsules as well. Because the same issue, the exact same issue is the case with capsules. You know, if we've got some series of boxes feeding the silo, we need to make sure that each of these boxes always has a capsule in it. And this one might be withdrawing a lot from it, so we need some sort of store so that this can take something. Oh, I put those in the wrong places. Oh, God damn. This is not insignificant. This is not as easy as it might seem. And this is only caused because I'm trying not to do the radial system. I'm trying to do this funky kind of network spiderweb system. The radial system does. This system is much simpler. But the base is going to be really, really tough. Just going to be doing a lot of work. I mean, that's not necessarily a problem. I'm thinking about, you know, the UPS, the numbers, the performance of the game. That's really kind of. I'm trying to keep things simple because I know I built my base big, and so if I want to keep the game running at a reasonable pace, I need to keep this system simple. And this seems like very complicated on the base. But it's going to make that base a whole lot more. Whereas this, you know, the challenge is in the maintenance, the management of those rocket parts and capsules. That it puts a whole lot less burden on the base. Anyway, by the by, because I think I've already decided anyway. You know, I've already built the radial base and I don't like it, and it didn't sit very well in my gut. I think I've already decided this is the way to go. So what I'm going to do, I might be having all these doubts at this moment in time, but my decision has already been made. You know, the doubts are caused because I'm discussing it. I'm drawing these stuff out. And sometimes just talking about it, just putting some stuff on paper, drawing diagrams, it really kind of clears your thought process. But I think on this occasion, I think it's just muddied the waters. Because I'm now thinking about just sticking with what I have. But I have already decided. I've already decided this is the way that I'm going to go. So what I'm going to do, because from the time-lapse perspective, I don't want this to be recorded. I don't want this kind of control panel to be in the final time-lapse. This is just wasted time from that perspective. So I'm going to demolish what I've built. I'm going to zoom the camera out to where it was at the end of the last transition. And I'm going to build it again. Set up for this system. With these kind of loops to deal with. I mean, are there any other things that I need to deal with? Rocket fuel is just an ingredient. That's just going to get used. We don't get any of that back. So that's just a sink. We sink rocket fuel into this system. And anything else is just a raw ingredient, whether it be ice or Volcanite or whatever. The basic system of rockets, this is it. Now, I've decided, regardless of whether I'm doubting it or not, that's the final decision. So let's get on with it. Let's just do it. There we go then. Action plan number 2 enacted. We've got a whole lot more going on now though. Let's go through it. I suppose I didn't go through the first one, but we'll go through this one properly in detail. So, down here in this bottom left hand corner we have the landing pad, which is going to deliver segments, fuel and capsules which will feed any other rockets that need to launch from this planet. And potentially also bring in other things from Norvis that I need. Now in my mind, my mind is thinking nitric acid, so You know, at some point I might need to bring nitric acid onto this planet. So that's one of the things that I could put in here. That's what these 4 belts up here are doing. And that's what these kind of things in here will be doing if and when I need them. We've also got a whole lot of segments unpacking. And we've got our 2 loops. So this is one loop. This is the loop that's going to deal with the space capsules. This is rocket fuel. So this is feeding all of the processes that need rocket fuel. This is segments, and this is the segment loop, or at least the start of it. I haven't finished it. So these are the processes that are going to feed all these subsequent rocket launches. However, at some point in the future, there might be a situation where I have too many rocket segments. Or, I suppose, now that I mentioned nitric acid, there might be a situation where I might need to return barrels back to Novice, potentially as well as some rocket segments. You know, if I've got too many up here, maybe a long way in the future. So that's what this rocket over here is going to do. This is going to deliver any excess that this factory needs to get rid of back to Novice to be put back into the system, whatever that might be, whether that be barrels or rocket segments or I don't know, scrap. I don't know, it could be anything. Then we have this next rocket up here. This one is going to be taking the Volcanite and delivering it back to Novice. So that's really its only purpose at this point in time, I suppose. There's a chance that I might need to add more things. But I suppose if I want more things, then if I say I need some iridium on Novice and I want to choose to do a rocket launch with that, then I'll just set up a whole other rocket above that deals with just iridium. This one can deal with just Volcanite. That kind of keeps this... Yeah, I like that. Over here, we've got just a miscellaneous landing pad so that when I come and visit this planet, I've got somewhere for it to go. And all of the rocket segments that come as a result of that rocket launch also, and the space capsule, also get filled into the rest of the system. That's what this conveyor belt is doing. So this is going to deliver rocket segments. It's going to come down here, the rocket segments, and then those are going to feed into the rest of the system. So this splitter here is actually doing 2 jobs in one. So firstly, it's taking the rocket segments that come as a result of these rocket launches. You know, the ones that we directly get, and it gives those priority over the rocket segments we get from the unpacked rocket segments, because these ones are really the ones I want to add to the system. If we need any more, I want to use the ones that are coming as a result of rockets first before we use these unpacked ones. So that's what this one's doing. And it's also, if this loop gets chogged up, in fact, this input, let's just do that. If this one gets blocked up, then it will output rocket segments, and those ones are the ones that go to excess. In addition, we also need rocket fuel that goes to the excess rocket, and we also, that loop that deals with the space capsules, that also obviously needs to go there, and not even just because we have excess ones, just because the rocket won't launch without one. So this loop goes all the way around. Now this loop's probably only going to have, I don't know, 30 or 40 capsules in it at any one time. You know, I've got this box, for example, I've programmed it to always have 2 in there. And so when this withdraws one for the next rocket launch, there'll be 1 left in there. So there should always be 1 or 2 in there. And if it drops to 0, then that's when we start moving towards the control panel. So these segments, this doesn't detect anything that's in a rocket. This detects the segments that are not in the excess one, because we don't want to count them in the excess one. It counts them up here, somewhere here. So this is the one that counts the segments. If we don't have any ones in here or in any of the subsequent rockets that might get added, then that's what displays down here. So it goes red if we need some, it's green if we don't. Similarly, same again with the fuel. I've got boxes set up for the fuel up here. I think I've got one down here for the excess one. And capsule, same again. Got a box up here for capsule. Got a box down here for capsule. Box over here for capsule. Have I got a box over here? Yeah, I just went to it. Right. And then we've obviously got the excess rocket. That's what this control panel is doing. This is dealing with this thing over here. So it's just telling us, do we have enough segments to launch a rocket, fuel, cargo? You know, this will fill up as the rocket fills up. And then once it's ready to go, this will be red, I think. Or green. I don't know. It's programmed to do something. Up here, this whole control panel is dedicated towards this one rocket, because this doesn't need any lights. So we've got two sections to it. We've got the first section which just deals with the progress of the rocket, and then we've got another panel which just deals with the progress of how much Volcanite has been loaded. Yeah, that's the status of the panel. It's a lot more hefty than the old one, and there's a lot more going on, which generally in my mind means that there's a lot more that can go wrong. I think I've covered my bases. You know, I'm trying to foresee things still in the future, and I think I've tried to cover my... For instance, you know, I've got these 4 belts. If I need any more than 4 belts, then I'm a little bit screwed, and I'm going to have to find another way. But, you know, at the end of the day, I do have these paths, and these paths, they are my get out of jail free card. So if I need more conveyor belts coming in and out of this one, I can route them into a path and get them in that way. You know, all else fails. I've got to get... If I'm forced into a corner, then things will start getting ugly. However, what we need to do from here is we need to go back to Norvis. Now, I actually need to repair a hole of the damage. Another worm has got well within my perimeter wall range and has wiped out a whole load of turrets again. Not as many as last time, but enough that I don't really want to leave it, although that did happen about 2 hours ago. So I'm going to go back to Novice. I'm going to deal with some bits and pieces, and then I need to build the 2 rocket kind of places, control panels that deal with this panel. So at the moment, excess, I don't need to deal with excess. I've got a place for that in my barrel place. I'll just put it to the same, it's dealing with the same thing. Even if it's got no barrels on it, I can still put it into the barrel place, because it will, we're dealing with all of the same stuff. It will just flow into the rest of the system. So I need 2 rocket places, one that will launch a rocket with rocket parts and land here, and I need another place which will accept all of the Volcanite, which means I need to build the Volcanite processing and thus pyroflux. Finally, we can get to some pyroflux. That will be a glorious moment to be able to unlock all of the steel and iron that I've had for about, what are we at now? A good couple of 100 hours I've been waiting for pyroflux, so it'd be really, really, really nice to get that sorted. So let's pop back to Norvis, because I think this is done now for the moment. I don't think I need to tinker with it anymore. We'll figure. I think I might need to do stuff with the satellite dishes. Anyway, I want to build the panel. That's really where my mind is. So let's go do that. So we've got 2 control panels here. One that's going to deal with Mariel and hopefully going to give us some Volcanite, and another one at the top of the screen which is for some other planet that we don't have no plan for. It's probably going to need at some point, almost certainly going to need at some point in time. I'm going to need several of these at some point in time. You know, when I made the time lapse and looked at it, this only filled half the screen. So I felt like, well, my standard time-lapse philosophy is, well, if I've got a screen, I need to fill it with something. And, you know, my plan is at this point is to move the camera somewhere else. So I wanted to, may as well fill the screen with a second one, perspective one, and it saves me a little bit of work, I suppose, in the future. And there's a slight complication with this one, because we've got an indication here of the same things, because we need segments, fuel and a capsule to build the rocket, and I want a set of lights to be able to indicate that. And then we need segments, fuel and a capsule to be able to send to Mariel to be able to make other rockets. So that's kind of how I've sectioned it off. This is the single rocket progress. This is the rocket that's going to launch from here to Mariel, and these are all the segments and fuels and capsules that I need for any subsequent rockets that are going to launch from Mariel. And then I've got 4 of these items potentially in the future. You know, that's what these conveyor belts, you know, I don't really know. They're just there. They might, I don't know, they're just there. Let's just leave it like that. If I need them, we've got them. And in general terms, I don't really like this layout, this control panel. It just doesn't, I don't like it. It's not that I don't like it, maybe that's the wrong way. It doesn't sit well in my, it just doesn't sit well. It's weird. So, you know, if we look at this control panel down here, I think this is kind of what it comes down to. You know, I'm always keen on trying to understand why it is I don't like something. So, you know, for me, I want to try and get to the bottom of it so I don't try and do it next time. And I think what it comes down to is the fact that, you know, I've got 3 kind of columns here indicating these 3 individual things. And that means that I can't do what I've done down here where I've got kind of these 2 columns and I've orientated all of the text around this central part. So this is reflected around here, you know, that everything is orientated around this, to this edge on either side. And I've got the light, and it all lines up, and because I've got 2 columns of it, I can reflect it around the middle, and it looks, and I quite like the elegance of that. And if we looked at the control panel that I've got on Mariel, we'll see exactly the same thing. You know, I've got these 2 kind of columns of text and lights, and I've got the opposite way around and over here. That I like. That makes me feel good. That sits well in the pit of my stomach. So when I laid down this one for these rocket parts, I just kind of looked. I was like, "Am I happy with it? Do I?" And then I kind of put it to one side, and then I just built a second one anyway. So now I have 2 control panels, which I'm not entirely happy with. No. The simple fact is that I'm treating all of these control panels as a, kind of an exploration in, you know, trying to understand the design language of how I want to set this stuff out. So I think most of these control panels, I'm going to make them up as I go along, and everyone is going to be a slight different variation on something else, maybe a combination of. I'm really going to try and explore. I really like the creativity involved with these things. They're really cool, and I like to get them right. And so while this one I'm not all that happy with, I'm going to use it for the time being. You know, equally, I'm not really all that happy with this one either, because these kind of lights at the top, the fuel, the segments, and the cargo, these only really relevant. I suppose the cargo, no, just the fuel and the segments. These 2 are just really relevant whilst the rocket is constructing. So these are only happening for like a minute or so whilst the rocket constructs. And once the rocket is constructed, these are green. And you know, and setting up all of this was quite a lot of work. So it's like, well, I actually only need a single light. That will do the same job. Green if we're good, red if we're not good. So you know, even though I like this, and I don't think in the future, if I was going to approach it differently, I think I would stick to something very, very similar. You know, dealing with this quantity of ingredients, that's a challenge in its own right, and that's what dominates this control panel. So I think I would stick with what I have mostly. I might change this around a little bit, but these two are ripe for improvement. I mean, let's be frank, I'm going to need loads of these. You know, how many planets am I going to need to launch rockets off of? 4, 5, 6, who knows? So I'm going to have plenty of opportunities to develop this idea. I'm just going to let it percolate in the back of my mind, and next time around we'll try something different and see how that sits in the pit of my stomach. But from here, what I want to do is I want to put those rocket parts in. I want to send a rocket to Mariel, and I want to record all of that with a time lapse. And that's going to be a little bit tricky, you know. Launching to different planets at the same time and recording the footage in 2 different places, that's a whole logistical nightmare for my PC. But anyway, that's the plan. Put some resources in, shoot them off to Mariel, record it all, and then I want to move over to the where I want to put the Volcanite and make the pyroflux, and I want to build another control panel for that in that place. That's kind of, I think that's where I want to go. So yeah, let's just get on with it. I'm going to take a little break from control panel hijinks just for a moment. I mean, that kind of feels like that's all we've done this episode. And we're going to have a quick look at Volcanite, because now that I've got a rocket that's being fed with these Volcanite blocks, I now have essentially an infinite sink to put those blocks in. I mean, I think that infinite sink has suddenly stopped. I think that rocket is now full. But for the purposes of understanding, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, I've kind of got to grips with what's been going on with the Volcanite, because I think what my original assumption with it was incorrect. I mean, it was incorrect. You know, I approached it from the mindset of, well, this is very similar to koverex, so I'm going to build the same kind of setup. I'm going to use the same kind of maths that I use for my koverex setup to build this Volcanite setup. And because they're similar processes, that should hopefully do the job. But it hasn't quite done the job, and I've been kind of watching it, trying to understand what's going on. I've been fiddling with it. I've tried a couple of different setups in here, and I've been trying to get to the bottom of why. Why are they different? Because the two processes are very similar, but yet when I built the thing, it didn't react the way that I thought it would. And anyway. So my first thought was that the problem is because of flow rates. Like, we've got a much greater flow rate flowing through this thing than was before, than we have in koverex. And by pushing stuff to the limit at that sort of rate, problems and faults start happening. You know, it was possible, in my mind, this was my original thought, it's possible that if I'd pushed koverex to the limit more than I do at the moment, you know, it kind of potters about, then maybe I would start exposing flaws and problems in that koverex setup. And let me just be clear, you know, the setup that I use for koverex is the same setup that I've used in a dozen factories over the last 2 or 3 years. It's changed very little, and it works just fine for me. So the idea that that could be wrong, that doesn't sit very well in my stomach. So I kind of thought about it a bit more, and I don't know whether the high flow rates come into it. I haven't quite figured out that yet. But what I am certain of is that that's not the governing issue. I think what the governing issue is that with koverex, U235 is incredibly rare, and we don't get very much of it. So we need to harness it. We need to savor it. And with that koverex setup, it's possible that we can run it too hot, too fast, too long, and it will create imbalances within the network, the system, that are kind of unrecoverable. And that's kind of the system that I've built. You know, I've got the triggers in there to prevent that situation from occurring. You know, in some respects, what I actually have is that whole koverex setup has a handbrake in there, so that when I want it to work, we can release that handbrake, and when I don't want it to work, we can engage that handbrake, shut down the whole process, and we can maintain the right levels in the system. But with Volcanite, neither of these things are very rare. So we don't need the handbrake. And that handbrake is what governs the koverex setup. So if I don't need the handbrake, how do I set this up? And that's kind of been where my mind is at. Because I had my little handbrake all set up, and it wasn't working very well, and it actually, because of the way that I built it, it kept breaking. Not necessarily breaking, you know, I was setting it up with a ratio, so I'm trying to get to a point where there's a ratio between the enriched Volcanite and the crushed Volcanite. But if what I'd had is what I've essentially built here, but slightly, you know, in intention anyway, is two systems of boxes which are exactly the same capacity. So what I'd had was that this the crushed Volcanite had filled up, and then from the ratios perspective, I need twice the amount of crushed Volcanite in order to release this handbrake. But because I've got the same amount of boxes, I can't actually generate double the amount of this enriched stuff, because it can only get to the same, because I've got the same amount of storage. It can only get to 1 to 1. It can't get to 2. this might seem a little bit too complicated. But the point is that that ratio was wrong. You know, working out the proportion of these two elements is wrong. I essentially want this koverex process of Volcanite, you know, all of these centrifuges to be running all of the time, and then I just need to be able to release a certain amount of that enriched Volcanite. You know, I essentially just need to be able to keep a certain amount of enriched Volcanite in the system so that it's not zero. You know, it's not going to be a lot. I mean, the trigger that I've got it down here at the moment, this is what the trigger is. I've got it set at a greater than 50k. So when I've got more than 50k of this enriched stuff, then it will feed the furnaces, and that's what will generate the Volcanite blocks. Now, there is a slight complication in that, because obviously I've got a lot more storage here than 50k. So if we get to a point where I'm releasing any more than 50k from this storage, then why have more than 50k's worth of storage here? And the reason for that is because the rocket launch. You know, we're not going to need permanent rocket launches. Those are only going to happen periodically when Norvis needs them. And I want this process to be building up stores of those materials in the meantime. You know, if we're full on Volcanite blocks, which is like where we are at the moment with this stuff full, then it actually doesn't make any difference whether we release this or not. This will release down, feed these furnaces, but these furnaces are already full on the output. So that is actually not going to make any difference. And whilst that is the case, then the stores in these boxes will build up. So what it's ultimately come down to is that I just want lots and lots and lots and lots of storage of these two things, and I just need to be able to release it when I've got a minimum amount in this enriched stuff, so that I've got enough to be able to restart the process, which, you know, I could probably do with 1,000. You know, I could probably change that 50,000 to 1,000 and everything would still work. I've set it to 50k. You know, I'm going to keep an eye on this and see how it progresses, but I think I've got to the bottom of it. I think I have, or at least enough to extract the maximum amount of what I've built. Because if you remember, we go back to when I built this thing, I was talking about these centrifuges and potentially that I've built too many of them. But actually what probably is the case is that I've built too few. So when I was talking about that earlier, I said, well, okay, in order to justify this to myself, I can just upgrade the belts and then it will get full utilization out of these centrifuges. But I am not there yet. I don't have that full fast belt, so but I want it now. I need it now. I need more centrifuges. So I've got 2 blue belts that feed it now. I know they're not full, but that's because they've got no crushed stuff. So I am now getting full utilization out of these centrifuges if and when the factory is able to achieve it. Yeah. I could make a compelling argument to myself that what I actually want is more centrifuges. That would be really nice at this point in time, I think. But we are where we are. I have what I have. And, you know, all things considered, if I was going to build more centrifuges, then, you know, I've got 2 columns at the moment. I could add another one, make it 3, but then I would need 3 of these belts to feed it. And I don't like 3. 3 is an awkward number. 3, I don't know, it just doesn't always looks ugly. So if I was doing this again, I would probably want 4 columns. And 4 columns would probably need a whole lot more storage, and potentially even some more pulverizers as well. So, you know, if I was doing this again, I might think about rejigging things, but I'm happy with what I got. I think it's going to do the job. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to achieve the numbers that I was planning on it achieving, but I don't think we're going to be flow rate critical. You know, really, I suppose at this point, all I really want to do is get this one so it works right, because although it was kind of in my thoughts that I might want to double what I have here, it's now definite want to double, at least. So I want to get this block right so that when I copy it over to the other side of the bus, it is perfect and I don't have to think about it, I don't have to worry about it, I don't have to watch it, I don't have to question whether the thing I've got is right. So I'm just going to sit in here, just watch it for a little while, just see if it's doing the things that I want it to do. And then I'm going to whiz back to Novice and start building another control panel, because we need the Volcanite input and we need all the pyroflux, and we need to feed that to the iron and the steel. We need to make a whole lot of casting machines. We need to upgrade. We need to hold a whole lot of things on Novice, to be honest. Not just Volcanite related. There's a whole lot of things and problems that I want to fix, which I will get to once I have koverex. And I really, really need koverex. So that's the focus. Volcanite into Novice. trying to get some of that into space so we can get some science, just enough science to get koverex. And then we are in upgrade heaven. I'm gonna have, I don't know, hours and hours and hours of blissful upgrading and tidying up and perfecting that novice factory, getting it just perfect. You know, I still want to add more processes. I want more iron and steel and more copper. There's a whole load of things that need to be just a whole lot of things that need to be upgraded. So that factory can really do what it's designed to do. Because at the moment it's just kind of hobbling along. So that's the plan. I'm just going to look at this for a little while and then we'll get back to novice. Let's do it. Beautiful, beautiful iron and steel. Oh, and copper, I suppose. Shouldn't forget that one. It's been a long time coming to get to this point. It feels incredibly good to get it sorted, to get this part of the factory working just right. Just right. I love it. It's great. And also in that little kind of medley eclipse, because the time lapse is it's a bit of a mess at the moment because we're kind of dancing between planets and that kind of messes with my plan. But I had another point where power went down and I needed more power. So my mess of solar panels and accumulators, they're still here doing their job. I did not want to add more of them. At some point I'm going to demolish these. So, build more of them, just giving myself more of a job when I get to that point. So I bit the bullet and I finally turned on my uranium power without koverex. Because I had enough U235. I figured I should last me to a point where I can get to koverex and, happy days. And then immediately after turning it on, I got nervous about using all of that U235. So I've downloaded another mod. It's a heat sink temperature mod. So it will detect the temperature of the heat, not the heat sink, the heat pipe. This mod will detect the temperature of the heat pipe, and then when this goes below 500, then these insert as well. Not all of them. I think just one of them at the moment. Yeah, When it goes below 500 degrees, then this particular inserter will put fuel into this particular reactor. And, at some point I might have to turn on more of these reactors. But I'm really nervous about this U235. And what I found is that what this does is it turns all of these heat pipes into a massive kind of battery. Because we don't lose any heat from these heat pipes unless we extract heat from it. So this is actually storing a lot of electricity, and that means that I can use the solar panels, and that's what's happening. Most of the time the solar panels are the thing providing the power, and then this thing just kicks in as and when I drop below that. It's excellent. It's kind of reduced my need for koverex. I still definitely want it. I mean, the balance is over here in these chests. You know, like I said before, there's a balance that needs to be kept between these chests. It's in the wrong direction. You know, the balance where it breaks is in the other direction where I have too much U235. At the moment, I've got just an absolute monstrous amount of U238, and that's what I need the koverex for. But now that we have iron and steel, and a decent flow of electricity, you know, this is going to keep me going for some time. I know koverex is still very much on the menu. That's going to be coming very, very quickly, but I feel like I've got a little bit of grace. I feel like I've got a little bit of time to be able to deal with other things around this base. I've been building up a list, because obviously I've been whizzing around different places. I haven't really had a lot of time or energy to kind of dedicate to Novice. So I've had this little list building up in the back of my mind, which is what I'm going to get to, well, probably not now, but soon. Because now, this episode is way too long already. I need to really kind of think about how I'm going to go forward with these episodes, because they're getting way too long. I think it's just a facet of how complicated these mods are and how much I like to think about it. And, you know, when I think about it, I talk about it. But anyway, that's enough for this episode. I hope it's been good. Till next time.